Welcome back. Get comfortable. Pull that blanket a little tighter, dim the lights, and settle in. Because tonight we are going all the way down into one of the most quietly devastating character arcs ever written for an animated show. We are talking about Stanley Pines. Grunkle Stan Mr. Mystery, the man with 1,000 aliases, a criminal record in 32 states, a fez he never takes off, and a secret he carried alone in the dark for 30 full years. This is his entire story, and it is going to take a while. Section 1. The character who wears 1,000 names. There is something almost disorienting about the way Grunkle Stan is introduced to us at the very start of Gravity Falls. He walks out of the mystery shack in that rumpled black suit with the red fez sitting slightly crooked on his head, an 8-ball cane in one hand and a cash register under the other arm, and the first thing he does is charge a tourist an entry fee for absolutely nothing. He grins. He winks. He pockets the money. The whole transaction takes maybe 12 seconds, and already you feel like you understand exactly who this person is. He is a con man, a grumpy, lovable, slightly ridiculous old con man who runs a tourist trap in the middle of the Oregon wilderness and scams people out of their hard-earned vacation money by showing them jackalopes that are clearly just a rabbit glued to a deer skull. He has terrible personal hygiene habits. He watches too much television. He is constitutionally incapable of giving a straight answer. He yells at Suze for breaking things, charges the twins for using the bathroom, and once got arrested with two 12-year-olds for printing counterfeit currency. He is, by any reasonable measure, not a good guardian. And yet, there is something in the way he makes those fishing hats with the kids' names on them that you catch only if you're paying attention. Something in the way he never quite looks away when Dipper gets hurt. The way he calls Mabel Pumpkin when he thinks nobody can hear him. The way he will sometimes pause in the middle of whatever scheme he is running and just watch the two of them with this expression on his face that doesn't have a name. Fond, maybe, grateful, a little heartbroken. Grunkle Stan is one of those characters who makes more sense the more you know about him. And the more you know about him, the more it hurts. Because the joke of the show, the joke that Alex Hirsch was telling from the very beginning before anyone understood it, is that the most seemingly selfish character in Gravity Falls is actually the one who has spent decades giving up everything for someone who wasn't even there to receive it. The con man has been running the long con of his entire life, and the mark was never a tourist. The mark was loneliness, and the prize was something you cannot put a price on. His full name is Stanley Pines, not Stanford. Stanley. This distinction matters enormously, and we will get to it in time, but for now, just hold that. There is a Stanford in this story, and there is a Stanley, and for 30 years the world thought they were the same person, and that was exactly what Stanley needed everyone to believe. He goes by many names over the course of the show and over the course of his life. Grunkle Stan to the kids, which is a smush of great uncle and something warmer. Something that implies the specific kind of love that comes with being family, even when you are not entirely sure how you are supposed to act like it. Mr. Mystery to the tourists, Stanford Pines in all official capacities, on the mortgage, on the lease, on every scrap of paperwork associated with the Mystery Shack. A name he borrowed without permission and wore like a second skin for decades. Stetson Pinefield, Hal Forrester, Andrew 8-Ball Alcatraz. A parade of aliases stretching back through the years he spent drifting from state to state, selling broken vacuum cleaners and rash-inducing bandages to people who deserved better. Underneath all of those names is the same person. A man who grew up being told he was worth less than his brother. A man who accidentally shattered the most important thing in his world and spent the rest of his life trying to put it back together. A man who carried guilt the way other people carry wallets. Always there, always with him, never quite able to put it down. That man is who we are here for tonight, his whole story, from the very beginning, from Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey, all the way to the open ocean. Every chapter of it. The funny parts and the devastating ones and the parts where the two things are so tangled together, you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. That is the specialty of Stan Pines. That is kind of his whole thing. One more thing before we begin, and it is worth sitting with. The title Grunkle is itself a window into something. It is a portmanteau, a smush of great uncle and something warmer and stranger, something that admits to the oddness of the relationship before a single word has been said. Dipper and Mabel do not call him Great Uncle Stan, they call him Grunkle. And the fact that this nickname apparently came from the family, passed down through their parents, tells you that even before these two kids ever set foot in Gravity Falls, someone, Shermie Pines probably, or their parents, had a sense that this particular great uncle required a particular kind of title. Not formal, not distant. Something that acknowledged the weirdness and the warmth simultaneously. That is Stan, actually. The whole thing is that weirdness and warmth, inseparably bound. You cannot have one without the other. The warmth only exists because of the specific strange shape that this man's life took. The weirdness only matters because the warmth underneath it is real. And there is one more layer to this, one more detail that the show hides in plain sight. The show's protagonist is Dipper Pines, a 12-year-old boy spending a summer solving mysteries. But the show's real protagonist, the character whose arc forms the emotional spine of the whole series, the person the show is quietly, persistently, undeniably about, is this old man in the fad. The show knew this from the beginning. The opening theme's first cryptographic message, decoded, reads, Stan is not what he seems. Not Dipper, not Mabel, not Ford. Stan. He is the center of gravity of the story. He is what everything orbits around, even when the camera is pointed elsewhere. And now we are going to orbit consciously, deliberately, and in full understanding of what we are circling. Get comfortable. We are starting at the start. Hey, if you are watching this from your bed, your couch, or somewhere strange and wonderful tonight, drop a comment down below and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is, where you are. I always love seeing the places these videos reach. And if this is your first time here, smash that subscribe button. It is completely free, and it means the world to this channel. Okay, let us go. Section 2, Glass Shard Beach, where it all begins. Picture a boardwalk town on the Jersey coast, the kind of place that is beautiful in the summer and a little sad in the off-season. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nobody ever quite leaves. The kind of place that breeds characters, people with more personality than prospects, people who tell stories because there is not always much else to do. This is Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey, and this is where Stanley Pines was born. The name of the town is worth sitting with for a moment, because Alex Hirsch did not pick names carelessly. Glass Shard Beach. It sounds like somewhere that could cut you, somewhere where even the sand might leave a mark. It is a working-class town, a gritty one. The Pines brothers grew up in something called the Lead Paint District, which tells you everything you need to know about the kind of neighborhood this was. Not wealthy, not cushioned from the rough edges of the world. The kind of place where the lesson was that you had to be tough, because the world was not going to be gentle with you, and if you were not ready for it, you were going to end up like the glass shards on the shore, broken and sharp and scattered. Stanley was born 15 minutes after his twin brother Stanford, somewhere in the late 1940s to early 1950s. 15 minutes younger. It is a small gap that would grow into an enormous one over the years, but at the beginning, those 15 minutes meant nothing. The two boys were inseparable from the start. Their father was Philbrick Pines, who ran a pawn shop called Pines Pawns, right there in Glass Shard Beach. Their mother was Karen Pines, who worked in the shop as well and apparently told enough tall tales that she probably contributed to at least some of Stan's gifts as a storyteller. There was also a younger brother, Shermie, who shows up only briefly in the show's flashbacks, but is important because it is through Shermie that the twins eventually become the great uncles of Dipper and Mabel. Shermie Pines is the grandfather the twins are always mentioning, but that is later. For now, there are just 3 boys growing up in a pawn shop town by the sea, and 2 of them are twins. Stanford was the intellectual, 6 fingers on each hand. A genetic anomaly that would have made him a target for cruelty if it had not made him remarkable. And it was remarkable, and he knew it. And his father knew it. And so Stanford was the one with the bright future. He built things. He understood things. His brain worked in ways that astounded people, and even as a child he was doing science experiments that seemed beyond his years. Ford was the one people pointed to and said that kid is going somewhere. Stanley was the other one. Not stupid, not without gifts. but not Ford. And in a household where Ford was the standard, not being Ford was a kind of failure in itself. Stanley was big and strong where Ford was thin and bookish. Stanley was funny where Ford was serious. Stanley was the one who got into trouble, the one who talked back, the one who copied Ford's homework because it was faster than doing his own. He was also, and this is important, the one who was there. Ford could exist in his own head for hours, lost in some equation or experiment, genuinely unreachable. Stanley was present in a way that Ford sometimes wasn't, and that presence, that full-body aliveness to the moment, that willingness to wade into things, those were gifts too. They were just the kind of gifts that Philbrick Pines did not know how to value. The boys were bullied frequently. This was apparently a feature of Glass Shard Beach childhood. Their main tormentor was a kid named Crampleter, and Crampleter had friends, and the two Pines boys were not popular in the way that protects you from that kind of thing. They were weird. Ford with his extra fingers, Stanley with his loud mouth and his habit of picking fights he could not always win. Philbrick's response to the bullying was to enroll them both in boxing because the solution to the world being hard was to become harder, and this was the philosophy of Glass Shard Beach in general and Philbrick Pines in particular. The boxing turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to Stanley, actually. It was the beginning of something. He had the build for it, the broad shoulders, the thick arms, the jaw that could take a hit. He was good at it in a way he was not always good at school things, and being good at something mattered. It gave him a framework. It gave him a way of moving through the world that felt like his, not just Ford's leftovers. He also won the heart of a girl named Carla McCorkle this way, which you have to respect. Carla, whose nickname was Hot Pants McCorkle, which is the most wonderful detail in this entire story. He spotted her at some point, a younger Carla being harassed by someone at a venue, and Stanley reportedly left-hooked the aggressor without much deliberation. This is perhaps not the most defined origin story for a romance, but it is very on-brand for Stanley Pines. The two of them would go to a 50s-themed diner called The Juke Joint together, and for a while in his teenage years, Stanley Pines had a girlfriend and a skill and a place he belonged. And that was more than a lot of people get. The Juke Joint is worth imagining. A diner decorated to look like an earlier decade. Neon signs, booths with red vinyl, a jukebox actually playing. The kind of place that smells like French fries and feels like something. Stanley and Carla sitting across from each other, and maybe Ford tagging along sometimes, and the three of them being young in the specific way that feels limitless before anything has happened to limit you. The summer before everything is the summer when everything still seems possible, and that summer in Glass Shard Beach was theirs. Carla would eventually leave Stanley for a musician named Thistle Down. The name alone, Thistle Down, suggests exactly the kind of romantic rival who would be irresistible to a certain type of teenager and completely baffling to anyone with more life experience. Long hair, probably. A guitar. The kind of person who talks about frequencies and vibrations and makes a teenage girl feel like she is being seen by someone who really understands the universe. Stanley Pines was many things, but a man who communicated primarily through frequencies and vibrations was not one of them. He lost Carla. And then, very shortly after, in a completely different and far more devastating way, he lost Ford too. Or the version of Ford that the summer had been building toward losing. But the thing that mattered most, the thing that animated his whole childhood and would continue to animate his life for decades, was the dream he and Ford shared. They found a ship, an old wreck of a thing, half buried on the beach, probably not seaworthy and probably never going to be seaworthy, and they claimed it. They named it the Stan-O-War. They talked endlessly about fixing it up, about sailing it away from Glass Shard Beach, about seeing the world together. Just the two of them, the brains and the muscle, the perfect team, bound for adventure. It is the purest thing in Stanley Pines' whole life. That boat, that dream, two boys on a beach, looking out at the horizon, promising each other they would not stay small forever. The world was out there, and they were going to find it together. The show even plants a detail here. Blendon was here was written on the boards blocking the cave at Glass Shard Beach, which is a time traveler's calling card from the show's other storylines. a reminder that the universe is larger and stranger than it looks even in the flashbacks, that even the childhood beach scenes are touched on by the show's larger mythology. But the Stano War sits apart from all that strangeness. It is just a boat. It is just a dream. Two brothers and a boat and the ocean. The world had other plans. Section 3, the science fair and the night. Everything fell apart. Stanford Pines was, in the show's telling, something close to a genius. His perpetual motion machine was the kind of project that made science fair judges do double takes, the kind of experiment that attracted attention from people who mattered. And the people who mattered were paying attention to Ford in a very particular way as the twins moved through high school, because West Coast Tech, a prestigious university on the opposite side of the country, had noticed what Ford could do. This was, to Philbrick Pines, the most important thing that had ever happened to this family. A golden ticket. Ford got into a school like that, Ford became a scientist, Ford started making real money, and the whole Pines family would be elevated. This was the logic of a man who ran a pawn shop in the lead paint district and understood exactly what it meant to have one of your children be exceptional. Ford was the meal ticket. Ford was the future. And Stanley, well, Stanley was not Ford. The relationship between the brothers was not simple, and it is important not to flatten it into a clean narrative of the smart one and the dumb one, because that is not what was happening. They loved each other. They genuinely, deeply loved each other in the way that twins sometimes do, that particular bond that is almost hard to explain to people who did not experience it. That sense of someone being so close to you that you sometimes do not know where you end and they begin. The Stano War was still waiting on the beach. The dream was still alive, but Ford was being pulled away from it, and Stanley was being left behind, and the trajectory was becoming clear. Ford was going to get in that car and drive to California and become a scientist and be brilliant and successful and gone. And Stanley was going to stay in Glass Shard Beach working in his father's pawn shop and be the other one forever. The night before the college admission team was scheduled to come inspect Ford's perpetual motion machine, something happened. Stanley went into the gym where Ford's experiment was set up. This is where accounts get complicated because the show is careful about the framing here, so it was not premeditated. Stanley was upset. He was frustrated and scared and not fully in control of his own emotions, which is what it is like to be a teenager who is about to lose the only person in the world who has ever really known you. He did not go in there intending to break anything. He slammed his fist on the table. The machine broke. The next day, the admission team arrived, found the experiment non-functional, and withdrew their offer. Ford's path to West Coast Tech was closed, and when Ford confronted Stanley about it, and when Philbrick overheard the confrontation, the conclusion that the family reached was that Stanley had done it deliberately, that he had sabotaged his brother's experiment out of jealousy, out of spite, out of the desire to keep Ford close. Philbrick did not ask. Philbrick did not want to understand. Philbrick had one son who was going to be worth something, and now that was over, and he had another son who was apparently the reason why. The result was fast, and it was final. Philbrick threw Stanley out of the house. Not grounded, not punished. Out. With his things in a bag and the door closed behind him and the message delivered in terms that left no room for ambiguity. This family had no use for him. Stanley Pines was a teenager when he was disowned. Just a kid, really, though the word kid feels strange applied to someone who had already absorbed that much hardness. He made a promise as he walked away that one day he would be rich beyond anything his family could dream of. It was not a particularly well-considered promise. It was the promise of someone who was furious and humiliated and trying to turn being expelled from his own life into a motivation rather than a wound. He kept it, sort of. Eventually. The wound never quite healed. And Ford, who was brilliant and angry and also heartbroken, who had just lost his university placement and his trust in his twin brother simultaneously, went on to find another path. Because that is what happens when someone is genuinely extraordinary. The world finds ways to accommodate them. Ford got to West Coast Tech eventually. He went on to do the kind of research that would define his whole life. He went to Gravity Falls, Oregon, and he built things in the woods that no one should have built, and he made a deal with a demon that no one should have made. But that is Ford's story, and we are here for Stanley tonight. Stanley left Glass Shard Beach with his clothes and his boxing skills and his pride and very little else, and started trying to build something from nothing. Section 4. Stanley Pines, salesman, drifter, outcast. The years between getting thrown out of his childhood home and arriving in Gravity Falls are, in the show's accounting, a long and colorful disaster. Stanley Pines did not stumble into a career so much as he fell into a series of increasingly creative failures, each one moving him a little further from the life he had imagined and a little deeper into the particular skill set of a man who had nothing to lose. He founded Stanco Enterprises. The name has a certain charm to it, the optimism of a kid who is already branding himself before he has anything worth branding. Stanco Enterprises was, in practice, a traveling sales operation, and the products it sold were spectacularly bad. The Stanvac vacuum cleaner, whose slogan was literally, "It sucks more than anything." The rip-off bandages that gave people rashes, the towel that made stains worse rather than better, a product called Sham Total, which appears to have been some kind of cleaning supply that did not clean anything, a pitchfork, several other items whose exact nature has been lost to history but whose quality can be inferred from the fact that they resulted in Stanley being banned, eventually, from 32 of the 50 states. There is something almost admirable about this in a deeply misguided way. Stanley Pines had absolutely no product that worked, no service that delivered what it promised, no skill at manufacturing or sourcing or quality control. But he had a mouth. He had that specific talent, that gift of persuasion, the ability to stand on a doorstep in a town where nobody knew his name and talk someone into buying something they did not need and did not want, and would regret purchasing within roughly 48 hours. He had charisma. He had brass. He had the ability to look a complete stranger in the eye and make them feel, for just a moment, like they were being let in on something special. This is not a small thing. Most people cannot do this. It requires a particular combination of confidence and read-the-room intelligence, the ability to gauge what someone wants to hear and then say it convincingly, the kind of social fluency that looks like instinct but is actually, when you trace it back, practice. Years of it. The accumulated wisdom of 1,000 doorstep transactions gone wrong, and then, gradually, less wrong. He traveled. New Jersey to Pennsylvania when the Band-Aid situation became legally complicated. Pennsylvania to somewhere else. State after state after state, changing his name when a name became too hot, building up a collection of aliases the way other people build up frequent flyer miles, not because they want them exactly, but because the life they are living makes them necessary. He has a string of identities that reads like a comedy routine. Stetson Pinefield, Hal Forrester, Steve Pennington, Andrew 8-Ball Alcatraz. He got arrested in Colombia on what the show describes as a heist that went badly wrong, and he ended up sharing a cell with two men named Jorge and Rico. And when he got out, he was broke and tired and practically homeless, renting a motel room in a place called Dead End Flats, New Mexico, which is about as perfectly named a location as the show ever invented. One of the products he sold during this period was the Stanvac vacuum cleaner. Its slogan, and this is the genuine show canon slogan, was Stanvac, "It sucks more than anything." This tells you everything you need to know about the distance between Stanley's confidence and his quality control. He genuinely could not see why this would not work as a sales pitch. He was probably standing on the doorstep of strangers delivering this line with complete sincerity, with the full weight of his considerable charisma behind it, baffled when the door closed. There were also the Sham Total cleaning supplies, which apparently failed to clean. The pitchfork, which was apparently just a pitchfork, but somehow also a product he was selling door to door. The list goes on. He was not just banned from the continental United States. Stanco Enterprises. And it is important to remember that this was what he called his operation, Stanco Enterprises, the name of a man who had complete faith in his own brand, even when the brand was objectively terrible, was apparently banned from New Jersey specifically, which required getting himself banned from his home state, in addition to 31 others. He relocated to Pennsylvania, and the Band-Aid rash situation followed him there too. He had to get creative, legally speaking, which is why the aliases proliferated. There was also a brief marriage in Las Vegas to a woman named Marilyn, last name Fakina May, which, in retrospect, was perhaps a warning Stan should have heeded more carefully. The marriage lasted less than a day before Marilyn robbed him of his car and money and disappeared by jumping through what Stan described as a mysterious door in a canyon. This is one of those details that the show drops with enormous casualness, and that rewards the attentive viewer because it suggests that even in his own chaotic romantic life, Stan attracted people who were stranger than they appeared. The show very lightly implies, through various contextual details, that Marilyn was actually a dimension-traveling witch in disguise, which if true would make Stan's brief marriage the only point in the whole show where he unknowingly encountered something even more anomalous than himself. Dead-end flats. That is where you end up when things have been going wrong long enough and hard enough. When you have been arrested in 3 different states, banned from 32 more, and your most recent business venture involved a foreign prison. When you are sleeping in a motel room that smells like someone else's regrets, and counting change for vending machine meals, and wondering whether the promise you made to yourself when you were a teenager walking away from your father's house means anything anymore. He was apparently in contact with his younger brother Shermy, the one who stayed out of all the drama, the one who built a quiet, normal life and had kids and grandkids and was by every account a perfectly decent person. Shermy was not the problem. Shermy was the thread that kept Stanley connected to some sense of family, however tenuous. But Shermy was not Ford. And the thing that still sat in Stanley's chest all those years later was Ford. Because here is the part that the show makes clear without ever saying it directly. Stanley never stopped missing him. Not the way you miss a place, the way you miss a limb. Ford had been the other half of Stanley's whole self since before Stanley could remember, and the night Philbrick closed the door there was an amputation that Stanley was still living with every single day, carrying the phantom ache of it through all those motel rooms, and all those aliases and all those state lines. And then one day, a postcard arrived at the Dead End Flats Motel. It was from Oregon. Section 5, the postcard from Gravity Falls. The postcard is such a small thing when you describe it. A piece of cardstock, a few words, a return address. But in the context of Stanley Pine's life, it is an earthquake. Because it is from Ford. After years, multiple years, maybe a decade or more depending on the timeline, of total silence, of Stanley reaching out at various points through Shermy or through whatever channels were available and getting nothing back, Ford has finally made contact. Ford has finally sent something. The postcard says roughly that Ford is in Gravity Falls, Oregon, and that he needs Stanley to come. You can imagine what this does to Stanley Pines in that motel room. You can imagine the way he reads it 3 times just to make sure it is real. The complicated knot of emotion that arrives with it, relief and anger, and something that wants to be hope and is not quite ready to be called that yet. Ford reached out. Ford wants to see him. After all this time, after the science fair and the throwing out, and the years of silence and the growing distance, Ford has finally sent a postcard. Stanley went. Of course he went. He was in Dead End Flats in New Mexico with nothing to lose and everything to gain, and a postcard from the only person in the world who had ever mattered to him in that particular way. There was never really a question. He drove to Gravity Falls, Oregon. The drive through the American West to the Pacific Northwest, through the desert, and then the mountains, and then the dense ancient forests that crowd in on either side of the road as you get deeper into Oregon. Stanley made this drive with absolutely no idea what he was walking into. He knew Ford was a scientist. He knew Ford had been doing research. Beyond that, the postcard had not been specific, and Stanley had learned not to have too many expectations where Ford was concerned, because expectation and Ford had historically been a painful combination. What he found when he arrived was a house. A substantial one, actually. Ford had clearly been here for a while and had been putting resources into the property. It sat at the edge of the forest, a bit ramshackle and odd-looking in the way that buildings get when someone who is deeply focused on something other than interior design has been living in them for years. There were strange objects everywhere. The whole place had the energy of a place where very large and very complicated things had been happening. And Ford? Ford was a mess. Brilliant but scared, running on too little sleep and too much paranoia. Clearly not the collected scientific genius of his youth, but something more frantic, more brittle. Ford had been in Gravity Falls for years, studying the supernatural concentration of anomalies in and around the town, cataloging everything he found in a series of numbered journals. His research had taken him to places he had not expected. He had made contact with something. He had made a deal he now understood to be very bad. Ford had built a portal, an interdimensional portal, the kind of machine that, if you fed it enough power and the right instructions, all of which were distributed across 3 journals, each one containing a portion of the operating parameters, would open a door between this dimension and others. Ford had built this thing partly out of genuine scientific ambition and partly because a triangular dream demon named Bill Cipher had guided him toward it, had presented itself as a collaborator and a muse and a brilliant friend, and had, over years of late-night conversations that Ford thought were intellectual partnerships, slowly maneuvered Ford into building a gateway that Bill intended to use as an entry point for an apocalypse. Ford had figured this out. Or rather, Ford's assistant, a man named Fiddleford McGucket, had figured it out first, in the most horrible way possible, by getting his leg caught in a rope and being pulled part way into the portal before Ford could drag him back. And in those few moments of being half inside the portal, McGucket had glimpsed what was on the other side. What he saw was bad enough that he had quit the project on the spot, built himself a memory-erasing device, and started down a road of self-inflicted amnesia that would take 30 years to fully unravel. That is what the portal was pointed at. That is what was waiting on the other side. Ford had hidden 2 of the 3 journals, sent them away from the property so that no one could use all 3 to power the portal. He still had one. And when Stanley arrived, Ford's plan was to give Stanley that journal and ask him to take it as far away as possible, as quickly as possible, and never bring it back. Ford was going to seal the portal, destroy his research, try to contain the damage. The plan was not to reconcile. The plan was not to make things right between them. The plan was to use Stanley as a courier and then send him away again. Stanley did not take this well. You have to understand the context here. Stanley Pines has spent however many years living in motel rooms with assumed names, banned from most of the country, estranged from his family, carrying this weight of guilt and loss and longing for his brother every single day. And he drives across the country to get here, to this house in the Oregon forest, to see Ford for the first time in years. And Ford's message is, take this and go again. Leave. Be useful in a specific way, and then disappear. Of course, Stanley was furious. Of course they fought. Section 6, the night Ford fell into the portal. The argument between Stanley and Ford in the basement of the house in Gravity Falls is one of the most tragic scenes in a show full of them. Partly because of what happens, and partly because both of them are wrong in ways that are completely understandable. Ford is operating from fear, which is making him cold and transactional. He is terrified of Bill Cipher. He is terrified of the portal. He has been living alone with this knowledge for a long time, and it has not been good for him, and right now he needs Stanley to just do what he has asked and leave so that Ford can manage the situation he has created. But Ford is delivering this message in the way that Ford has historically delivered bad news to his brother, without warmth, without acknowledgement, without any recognition of what this moment costs Stanley. Take the journal and go, as if Stanley is a delivery service, as if this is just a logistical problem to solve. Stanley, for his part, is not wrong to be angry. He is not wrong to want more than this. He has every reason to have hoped, when that postcard arrived, that Ford was reaching out because he wanted to repair what was broken between them, and what he got instead was a task and a dismissal. But Stanley's anger, the way it moves in him, fast and hot, and leading with his body before his mouth can catch up, that is part of the problem. It always has been. They fought, they got physical, the journals, Ford's notes, the portal controls, all of it was in a small space, and 2 men fighting in a small space with heavy equipment and running machinery is not a situation that stays tidy. Ford shoved Stanley back. Stanley stumbled. His back hit a piece of the control panel, and the metal burned a symbol into the skin over his shoulder, a scar he would carry for the rest of his life, that Dipper and Mabel would later try to identify as a tattoo, and that the show would explain was the symbol burned into him by the panel. And in that moment of collision and pain and confusion, Stanley pushed Ford. He pushed Ford, and Ford stumbled, and Ford fell backwards into the open portal, and the portal swallowed him. The machine shut down immediately after. Something about the power levels, the exact mechanism, does not matter. What matters is that the portal stopped working, and Ford was gone, and Stanley was standing in the basement of this house in the Oregon forest alone, staring at a machine that was no longer running, with no idea how to turn it back on and no one to ask. The portal needed all three journals to function. Ford had the other two hidden somewhere. Stanley did not know where. He had one journal and no knowledge of the physics involved, and no way to contact Ford and no way to know if Ford was even alive on the other side. He had pushed his brother into another dimension. This is the moment. If you want to understand everything that comes after, the mystery shack, the 30 years, the aliases, the portal work done in secret in the basement every night, this is the moment it all comes from. Not greed, not ambition, guilt. The particular crushing, galvanizing guilt of having accidentally sent the only person you ever really loved somewhere you cannot follow and then having to figure out what to do next. What Stanley did next was not go home. There was no home to go to. Glass Shard Beach was closed to him. Dead End Flats was just a motel room. He stayed. He stayed in his brother's house in the woods of Gravity Falls, Oregon, and he started trying to figure out how to bring Ford back. Section 7. 30 Years in the Dark. The scale of what Stanley Pines chose to do when Ford disappeared into the portal is almost impossible to fully absorb. He chose to stay. He chose to stay in that house, in that Oregon forest, and spend every available hour teaching himself enough interdimensional physics to reconstruct the experiment that would bring his brother home. He did not have Ford's brilliance. He was not a scientist. He had none of the formal training, none of the intuitive grasp of quantum mechanics and dimensional theory that Ford had developed over a lifetime of study. He had the journals, the one Ford had given him, and eventually, through means the show suggests involved some very creative detective work, he found the other two, the complete set, all the instructions, all the knowledge that Ford had compiled over years of research in Gravity Falls, translated into practical operational parameters for the portal machine. Stanley taught himself to read them. He spent years on this, years becoming functional enough in his brother's field to do the work that needed to be done, alone, in the basement, after the tourists had gone home and the lights were off and the shack was quiet. But wait, the shack. Right. When Stanley first arrived in Gravity Falls, he quickly ran out of food and he went into town for supplies. The locals noticed him and assumed he was Stanford, the eccentric scientist who had been living in the odd house in the woods. Stanford to these people was Mr. Mystery, the brainy recluse with the weird house full of strange equipment and stranger artifacts. They were curious about the house. They were willing to pay to see it. Stanley realized something. He was excellent at selling people things they did not need. He was excellent at talking. He had a house full of Ford's strange experiments and inventions, real anomalies, actual curiosities. And the people of Gravity Falls were exactly the kind of audience he had been looking for his whole career. Credulous, curious, and cash-carrying. The house became a tourist attraction. At first, when Ford's real inventions were drawing interest, it was fairly straightforward. But as the novelty wore off, Stanley did what Stanley always did. He improvised, he embellished, he built props and fabricated exhibits, and generally applied the full weight of his considerable theatrical gifts to the task of creating a convincing and profitable illusion. The Murder Hut, he called it at first. Then, perhaps recognizing that Murder Hut was not the most inviting brand, he renamed it the Mystery Shack. For the first time in his adult life, Stanley Pines had found something he was genuinely good at. Tourism, in this specific, peculiar form. The scam that was also, in a strange way, almost not a scam, because Gravity Falls was actually full of genuine paranormal phenomena, and Stanley actually knew this, and Stanley was actually one of the few people in town who understood just how real the strangeness was. But he could not tell anyone that. So he wrapped the real mysteries in fake ones and charged admission and hoped nobody looked too closely. He faked his own death. This was necessary for legal reasons. Stanley Pines was a man with a significant criminal record, banned from dozens of states, and he needed to occupy the house under a name that could hold a mortgage and have a driver's license and not get arrested when the local sheriff ran his plates. So he staged a car crash, the old Stanley Pines officially died, and Stanford Pines, Ford's identity, Ford's name, became his. It was identity theft in the most technical sense of the word, but in the context of the situation, Stanley would argue, and did argue later when the full story came out, that Ford would have understood, that Ford would have approved, or at least forgiven it, that it was the only practical way to keep the mission running. By day, he was Stanford Pines, Mr. Mystery, proprietor of the Mystery Shack, cheerfully scamming visitors out of their money with exhibits that were somewhere between 70 and 90% fake, depending on the day. By night, he was in the basement, always in the basement, working on the portal, studying the journals, teaching himself physics the hard way, the self-taught way, the way that takes 10 times as long and hurts about twice as much as learning something the conventional route. He was not always progressing. There were setbacks. There were nights where nothing worked, and everything he tried made things worse. There were moments where the whole enterprise must have seemed completely hopeless, where he was staring at a machine he barely understood, in a house he did not own, under a name that was not his, in a town where nobody knew the truth about anything. He kept going. 30 years. He kept going for 30 years. He boarded up Ford's old bedroom because looking at it was unbearable and he could not afford to be that sad every morning. He hid the access to the basement laboratory behind a vending machine in the gift shop because he could not risk anyone stumbling into the secret and derailing everything. He maintained the illusion of Stanford Pines so completely and so consistently that federal agents who spent decades tracking the mysterious activities at the Mystery Shack were never quite able to get enough to move on him. He did all of this alone. He did all of this without telling anyone. Not Shermy, not his mother, not anyone in Gravity Falls, not the employees he eventually took on. The great lie of the Mystery Shack was not really about the fake jackalopes. The great lie was this. A man who had accidentally cost his brother 30 years of his life was spending every waking free moment trying to give those years back, and he did it so quietly and so thoroughly and so alone that nobody even knew there was anything to admire. That is the secret at the center of Grunkle Stan. Section 8. The Birth of an Institution. Let us spend some time in the Mystery Shack itself because it is worth appreciating as a setting before we get too deep into the later seasons. The shack is not just a location. It is a character. It is the physical expression of everything Stanley Pines is. The way he wraps real things in fake surfaces, the way he monetizes the genuinely strange, the way warmth and comfort can coexist with transparent exploitation. The building started as Ford's research station. Clean lines, functional design, built for science rather than aesthetics. By the time Stanley was done with it, it was something entirely different. The facade is the famous one, the slanted roof, the enormous Mystery Shack sign with the dollar sign nestled into the lettering like a signature, the strange exhibits cluttering every window and every surface. Inside, the exhibits themselves, the jackalope, the Sasquatch, the remains of the wax museum, the collection of supposedly haunted artifacts, the gift shop with its marked-up merchandise and its hidden vending machine. The vending machine. This is the detail that the show drops casually in the very first episode, and that means nothing on first viewing and everything on every subsequent one. There is a vending machine in the gift shop. It seems normal enough in context. Tourist traps sell snacks, but if you press the right combination of buttons on that vending machine, it swings open to reveal a staircase going down into the basement. And in the basement is the portal, and the portal is what the whole house is really about. Stanley built the Mystery Shack around a secret, and the secret was love. Impractical, stubborn, somewhat catastrophic love, the kind that builds interdimensional physics experiments in a basement without a degree, but love nonetheless. He hired employees as the years went on. Edwin Durland, who was apparently not very good at handyman work and got fired. And then one day, a 12-year-old kid named Seuss Ramirez came by holding a screwdriver with a confidence that impressed Stanley, and Stanley offered him the job on the spot. This is one of those decisions that reveals more about Stanley's character than almost anything else he does in the show. He did not need to hire a 12-year-old. He did not need a handyman who was technically still in middle school. But something about this kid, the earnest enthusiasm, the loyalty already visible in the set of his shoulders, the way he was clearly someone who showed up and kept showing up, spoke to something in Stanley that recognized it. Seuss Ramirez is, in the show's universe, a young man without a father. His father never came. Not on birthdays, not on holidays, not ever really. Just a series of unreturned messages and empty dates on a calendar that Seuss apparently internalized with a grace that speaks more to his fundamental character than it does to the absence itself. Seuss found his father figure where he could, which turned out to be a grumpy old con man in an Oregon tourist trap who absolutely would never admit to being anyone's father figure. But Stan came to Seuss's confirmation. This is the detail, small, dropped in passing in some expanded lore, that gets you every time. Stan, who does not do sentimentality on purpose, who runs from warmth the way some people run from cold water, showed up for that. Because Seuss was his, not his employee. His. The way Stan eventually hands Seuss the Mystery Shack is the closing of that loop, though neither of them would call it that. Stan says, in effect, this place I built over 30 years, this thing I poured myself into, this home I made while pretending I was just running a business, I want you to have it. Because you are the person who will love it right. Because you already do. Because watching you come in every day with that screwdriver and that complete inability to be jaded about anything, that is what the shack deserves. Seuss puts on the fez. In the show's epilogue, you see him running the shack in Stan's old outfit with his girlfriend Melody, doing tours the way Stan taught him. The shack passes from hand to hand like an heirloom, carrying the character of the person who held it last, ready to be shaped by whoever comes next. Stan also eventually hired Wendy Corduroy, the red-haired teenage cashier whose main contribution to the Mystery Shack's operations was looking cool behind the register and occasionally doing actual work when sufficiently motivated. Stanley was not the world's most rigorous employer, but the people he collected around him, Seuss, Wendy, and eventually the twins, made the shack into something that transcended its origins as a front for Portal research. It became, against all of Stanley's apparent intentions, a home. He would not have called it that. He would have called it a cash-generating operation and made a comment about overhead. But look at the way he talks to Seuss in the quiet moments. Look at the way he watches the kids when they are not watching him. Look at the way he never, not once, even when he was at his most stressed and most desperate and most willing to cut corners everywhere else, put the twins in genuine danger without immediately pivoting to protect them. The shack was the shell. The family was what grew inside it. Stanley did not plan this. He was not a man with a plan for that. But it happened anyway, the way the best things do. Slowly, sideways, with a lot of arguing and minor crimes and accidentally counterfeit currency along the way. Section 9. Mr. Mystery by day, portal engineer by night. The daily life of Stanley Pines during the 30 years he spent alone in Gravity Falls before the twins arrived is worth imagining in some detail because the show only gives us glimpses, and those glimpses are haunting. He woke up every morning in a house that was not his, under a name that was not his, with a secret he could not tell anyone. He put on the suit, the black one, the rumpled one, the one with the slightly mismatched buttons and the red bow tie that speaks of a man who once knew how to dress for an occasion and has long since stopped fully caring. He put on the fez, which is the most theatrical touch, the prop that turns Stanford Pines from a person into a performance. He went downstairs. He opened the shack. The tours were his medium. There is genuine artistry in what Stanley did with the Mystery Shack tours, and it is easy to overlook because it is presented as essentially comedic. But watching him work the crowd, watching the way he modulated his voice and timed his jokes, and fed visitors exactly as much information as they needed to feel they were getting something real, it is clear that this was craft. Years of failed product sales had taught him something useful: how to read a room. How to give people the experience they were looking for, even when what you were offering bore very little resemblance to what you had advertised. He charged outrageous prices. He sold merchandise that was essentially worthless. He ran a dunk tank that was almost physically impossible to win. He ran schemes within schemes. Summerween candy hoarding. Counterfeit money with Mabel and Dipper that got them all arrested. An entire episode built around him trying to rig a fair so badly that the rides became safety hazards. The economic ambitions were always grander than the execution, and the execution was always slightly illegal, and the result was always roughly the same amount of money, because underneath the con was a genuine service. The mystery shack gave people a story to tell. And then the tourists went home, and the employees locked up, and Seuss went back to his grandmother's, and Wendy went back to her family, and Stanley was alone in the house, and he went down the stairs behind the vending machine. The basement, the portal, the journals spread out on the work surface, the readings that needed to be taken, the adjustments that needed to be made, the endless incremental work of a man trying to solve a problem he was not technically equipped to solve by sheer force of refusal to give up. He cut his hand on a flying pipe once, and the show catches him bandaging the wound alone in the basement, talking to himself. I've come too far. Nothing is going to stop me. It is such a small moment, such a quiet one, but it encapsulates the whole 30 years of it. This stubborn, battered, perpetually scruffy man, bleeding slightly, down in the basement alone at some ungodly hour, still working. He almost did it early. He came close to reactivating the portal before the twins arrived. But the machine needed all 3 journals, and for most of those 30 years he only had one. He searched. He hid from Gideon Gleeful, who had somehow gotten his hands on Journal 2. He did not tell anyone what he was really looking for. And when the summer arrived, the summer of Dipper and Mabel, the pieces were finally almost in place. Section 10. Gideon Gleeful and the War for the Shack. You cannot tell the full story of Stan Pines without spending some time on Gideon Gleeful, because Gideon is in many ways the antagonist who most directly threatens the thing Stan has spent 30 years building. Gideon is 10 years old. He has a white pompadour and a southern accent and a tent called the Tent of Telepathy, where he performs fake psychic readings for the citizens of Gravity Falls. He is, in the show's telling, preternaturally manipulative, genuinely malevolent, and possessed of exactly the kind of surface charm that adults tend to interpret as cuteness in children. His relationship with his parents is, if you look at it closely, genuinely disturbing. His father, Bud Gleeful, is clearly terrified of his son, and his mother seems to have been reduced to a near catatonic state by years of whatever Gideon considers appropriate behavior. Gideon and Stan have a rivalry that predates the show's timeline. They are both tourist trap operators in a small town, and the Tent of Telepathy and the Mystery Shack compete for the same visitors. But there is more to it than business competition. Gideon, with his actual supernatural abilities, he has Journal 2, which he uses to access real paranormal powers, specifically a shrinking crystal amulet, is genuinely dangerous in a way that Stan cannot fully counter, because Stan cannot admit to anyone that the supernatural is real. The rivalry escalates across the first season until Gideon makes a decisive move. He sends a dream demon into Stan's mind. The demon is Bill Cipher, the same Bill Cipher that Ford made a deal with decades ago, and Gideon's request is that Bill find the combination to the safe that contains the deed to the Mystery Shack. Gideon wants the shack. He wants to tear it down and build a Gideon-themed park in its place. Bill does not fully succeed because Dipper, Mabel, and Seuss go into Stan's mind and fight him there. But Gideon gets the deed anyway by detonating the safe with dynamite. Stan is ejected from his own property. The twins have to go back to California. Everything Stan has built for 30 years is suddenly at risk. The resolution comes because Gideon had bugged his promotional badges with recording devices, and these devices interfered with Stan's hearing aid, and when Stan realized this, he was able to use the recordings as evidence to expose Gideon's fraudulent psychic powers. Gideon is arrested. The shack is recovered. This sequence is important not just narratively, but character-wise, because it shows what Stanley Pines prioritizes when things get truly desperate. He does not prioritize the portal. He does not prioritize the secret mission. He prioritizes getting the twins back, getting his home back, making sure the family he has accidentally assembled does not get scattered by a 10-year-old in a white suit. The basement can wait. The kids cannot. He also, in the aftermath of the Gideon situation, gains possession of Journal 2. All 3 journals are now in his hands. The portal can be reactivated. The moment he has been working toward for 30 years is finally within reach. He does not tell the twins. He does not tell anyone. He goes down into the basement every night, and he works. Section 11. The summer the twins arrived. The timeline of the show's present-day events matters for understanding who Stan is when we meet him. So it is worth being clear. It is June of 2012, and Stan's great-niece Mabel and great-nephew Dipper, the grandchildren of his younger brother Shermie, are being sent to Gravity Falls to spend the summer. Their parents, it is gently implied, wanted to give the kids some fresh air and adventure and probably also some time away from their actual parents. Stan is the available option. Stan has met them before. The show mentions, almost in passing, that Stan visited them at the hospital when they were born, that he could not let go of them and had to be pried away by Shermie. This is the detail that lands differently on a rewatch. Here is a man who has been essentially alone for decades, who has no children of his own, who watched his family recede in the rearview mirror years ago, and he goes to the hospital when twin babies arrive in the family, and he holds them, and he does not want to put them down. He is not a man without feeling. He is a man who has learned to hide it so well that even the people who know him best often cannot see it. The twins arrive and Stan immediately puts them to work. The Mystery Shack does not run itself, after all, and these are two able-bodied 12-year-olds with no other immediate obligations. This is both genuinely somewhat terrible from a child labor standpoint, and also in Stan's framework, an act of welcome. Work is how Stan says, "I have a place for you here." It is not a kind language, and it is not always received correctly, but it is the one he has. Dipper finds Journal 3 in the woods in the very first episode, and the summer of paranormal investigations begins. Stan pretends not to know anything about this. He goes on pretending, episode after episode, that the supernatural stuff the kids keep running into is not real, that they are making things up or jumping to conclusions, that there is nothing unusual about Gravity Falls beyond the clever fakes he has installed in his tourist trap. This is an enormous lie. Stan knows exactly what is real in Gravity Falls, and he has known for 30 years. But he cannot tell them. He cannot explain the journals without explaining why he has one, and he cannot explain why he has one without explaining everything. The portal, Ford, the accident, the 30 years. He is not ready for that conversation. He is not sure he will ever be ready for it. So he maintains the pretense and watches from a careful distance as his great-niece and great-nephew walk directly into the paranormal heart of the most supernaturally saturated town in North America. He worries about them. He would never say this out loud, or at least not in any tone that admits to sincerity. But watch him. Watch the way he positions himself between them and danger when it counts. Watch the way he goes very still when they do not come home on time. Watch the way he throws himself into physical confrontations that should terrify a man of his age and build without any apparent hesitation the moment one of them is in trouble. The summer the twins arrived changed Grunkle Stan. Changed him in ways he probably did not fully understand while it was happening, and possibly could not have articulated even if he had tried. Section 12. Stan and Dipper, a stealth mentorship. The relationship between Stan and Dipper is one of the most carefully constructed things in Gravity Falls, partly because it is designed to look like the opposite of what it is. On the surface, Stan and Dipper clash constantly. Stan makes fun of Dipper's voice, dismisses his theories, assigns him chores that seem designed to be maximally annoying, and generally treats him as the least impressive person in any room. From Dipper's perspective, which is the perspective the show mostly operates from in the early episodes, Stan is a grumpy old man who does not take him seriously and does not understand what he is dealing with. But the show eventually shows us what is actually happening through a reveal that is handled with extraordinary care. In the episode Dreamscapers, Dipper goes inside Stan's mind, literally, actually inside Stan's memories and thought processes, to prevent Bill Cipher from finding the safe combination. While navigating the mindscape, Dipper accidentally witnesses one of Stan's memories. He sees a younger Stan talking to Seuss, explaining why he is so hard on Dipper. He is trying to toughen him up. He sees himself as a scrawny kid who does not know yet what he is capable of, and he is trying to give that kid the tools to survive in a world that will not always be gentle with him. It is a stealth mentorship. Stan is not doing it through praise or encouragement or explicit teaching. He is doing it through friction, through tasks that push, through the implicit message that difficulty is not the end of something, it is the beginning. He is, in his own imperfect and not entirely defensible way, trying to build Dipper into someone who can handle the things that are coming. He does not tell Dipper this. He does not tell anyone. It just is. This is Stan's emotional vocabulary laid bare. He does not say, "I care about you." He shows it through proximity and difficulty and the very occasional direct moment of warmth that he immediately deflects with a joke. He is not good at the words. He has spent too long being the person nobody really talked to, the person who had to figure things out alone, the person whose emotional landscape was private by necessity. But the care is there. It is there in every chore and every joke and every time he positions himself between the kids and something dangerous without being asked. Dipper, for most of the series, is frustrated by Stan and wishes Ford, when Ford eventually comes back, was his primary adult. Ford is brilliant and takes him seriously and talks to him like an intellectual equal, which is incredibly appealing to a 12-year-old who has spent his whole life feeling like nobody quite gets how smart he is. Stan is blunt and embarrassing and constantly underestimating him, apparently. Except he is not. But Dipper cannot see that for most of the series. The moment when Dipper sees the memory is a turning point. It does not immediately fix everything. The relationship between Stan and Dipper is complicated and stays complicated, but it plants something. An understanding that there is more going on under the surface than the surface suggests, which is, in a way, the lesson about every person who matters in your life. Look under the surface. Things are usually more complicated there, usually more worth knowing. Section 13. Stan and Mabel, the softest secret. If the Stan and Dipper relationship is the one the show positions as complicated and developing, the Stan and Mabel relationship is the one it guards most carefully, presents most gently, and probably hits the hardest when you see it clearly. Mabel does not push back against Stan the way Dipper does. Mabel rolls with Stan. Mabel does her chores with approximately the same energy she does everything, enthusiastically, slightly inaccurately, in a way that generates more chaos than expected, but also more warmth. Mabel calls Stan Grunkle with total sincerity and zero irony, and Stan calls Mabel Pumpkin and Sweetie when he thinks nobody is paying attention. And there is something in the way these two operate around each other that is different from the way everything else in the show operates. Stan is softer with Mabel than he knows how to be with anyone else. Not obviously. It is never obvious. It is always wrapped in jokes or dismissals or that particular deflecting energy Stan uses when something real is happening, and he does not want to acknowledge it. But it is there. She brings it out of him. There is an episode where Mabel discovers Stan has a crush on Lazy Susan, the waitress at Greasy's diner, and instead of making fun of him for it, she just helps. She genuinely, straightforwardly, without agenda, tries to help her great-uncle win over a woman he likes. And Stan, who could not possibly admit to either of them that this was a real thing he cared about, goes along with it in his gruff, sideways way. And for a little while, there is this window into who Stan might have been if he had ever let himself want things openly instead of always wanting them in secret. The love between Stan and Mabel is the most uncomplicated love in his life. She does not remind him of Ford. She does not trigger his guilt or his defenses or the complicated father-son dynamic. She is just Mabel, bright and strange and full of affection and completely impossible not to love. And Stan loves her back, fully, in the wordless way that some people express the most important things. When Weirdmageddon comes, and we will get to Weirdmageddon, the scene that finally breaks open Stan's sacrifice is not about Ford, and it is not about proving himself, and it is not about guilt. It is about a scrapbook. It is about Mabel. But we are not there yet. Stay with the summer. Stay with the warmth of it, because the warmth matters when the storm arrives. Section 14. Not what he seems. The truth finally comes out. There is an argument to be made that Not What He Seems is the greatest episode of Gravity Falls, and one of the arguments for it is the way it handles Stan. The entire season has been building toward this moment. The portal getting closer to being ready, the government agents closing in, the secret that has been held for so long becoming impossible to hold anymore. And when it breaks in a way that is genuinely, viscerally uncomfortable. Stan is arrested by federal agents. Two of them, Powers and Trigger, have been watching the Mystery Shack for years, and they have finally accumulated enough evidence to move. The charges are identity fraud, which is accurate as far as it goes. Stan is taken in, interrogated, and in the interrogation, the truth begins to emerge. Stan Pines, per a decades-old newspaper clipping, died in a car crash. The Stanford Pines currently in custody is not who he claims to be. Meanwhile, back at the shack, the portal is activating. The weeks of work Stan has been doing, all those late nights, all those journal calculations, have finally aligned, and the machine is powering up without any human input. The interdimensional portal is winding toward completion, and in the process it is creating gravity anomalies that are affecting the whole building and the surrounding area. Dipper and Mabel are terrified. They do not know what is happening. They do not know what is in the basement. They have the choice. There are instructions accessible. Technical information suggesting that the portal can be shut down before it fully activates, that shutting it down will prevent whatever is coming. Dipper wants to shut it down. Of course Dipper wants to shut it down. Dipper has been gathering information all summer, and the information clearly indicates this is dangerous. And then Stan escapes from custody because of course he does. Stan Pines has been evading law enforcement for decades, and 2 federal agents are not going to contain him tonight of all nights. And he gets back to the shack, and he gets to the basement, and he finds Mabel with her hand on the controls that could stop the portal. This is the scene that the entire first season has been moving toward, without anyone knowing it. Stan cannot explain. He cannot give Mabel the full story in the 30 seconds he has before the portal completes. He cannot explain Ford, or the accident, or the 30 years of solitary engineering in the basement of a tourist trap. He can only ask. He can only look at this 12-year-old girl who trusts him, who has always, in her particular uncomplicated way, trusted him and say, please, give me this. Trust me. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he tells her roughly. I'm asking you to trust me. And Mabel, after a moment that costs her something, after looking at her brother and making the choice that goes against everything Dipper is telling her, steps back, lets the portal run, trusts Stan. The portal completes. The gravity surge settles, and a man walks out of the light at the base of the portal, tall and thin and wearing a yellow coat with 6 fingers on each hand. Ford Pines has come home. 30 years. 30 years of work in the dark, and it is done. Section 15, A Tale of Two Stans. The Full Confession. A Tale of Two Stans is the episode that has to exist after Not What He Seems, the one where all the cards come face up on the table and everyone in the room finally knows everything. Dipper, Mabel, Suze, and the recently returned Ford confront Stan in the basement and demand the whole story, and Stan, who has been keeping this secret for 30 years, who has never had to explain himself to anyone who had a real stake in the explanation, gives it. He tells them everything. Glass Shard Beach, the science fair, Philbrick, the disowning, the years of traveling sales and failed products and prison stints and state bans, the postcard from Ford, the argument, the push, Ford disappearing into the portal. He tells them about the 30 years that followed, about faking his own death, taking Ford's identity, building the mystery shack as a cover for the real work, about studying the journals alone every night, about the grinding, unglamorous work of teaching himself enough of his brother's field to eventually, finally, get the machine running. The way this confession is delivered in the episode is worth pausing on. Stan does not make it pretty. He does not frame it to make himself look better than he was, or to strategically omit the parts that reflect badly on him. He tells it the way a man tells a story he has rehearsed alone for years. Not because he planned to say it, but because he has lived with it so long that it has found its own shape. The guilt has given it a structure. This is what I did. This is what happened. This is the 30 years. There is a particular quality to that kind of confession, the one that comes from someone who has been carrying a thing so long that the carrying is part of them now. It is not cathartic, exactly. It is more like setting something down, like after 30 years of holding it at arm's length and never looking at it directly, finally looking. Here it is. All of it. What I did and what I did to fix it, and what it cost everyone, including me, especially me. And I am not asking for absolution because I am not sure I deserve it, and I am not sure absolution is the point. The audience for this confession matters enormously. Mabel is devastated, but still herself. She is still the person who always found a way to trust Stan, and Even hearing this, even sitting with the enormity of it, she does not pull away from him completely. Dipper is processing it with the intensity of someone who built his whole summer around this man without knowing any of this, and the processing is complicated and not entirely comfortable. Seuss, characteristically, is just present, just there, being Seuss, and Ford. Ford, who has just spent 30 years in other dimensions, who has come back to find that his brother wore his identity and lived in his house and built a tourist trap over his lab, and has now brought him home as the culmination of a project Ford did not ask for and does not know how to receive. Ford punches Stan, almost immediately, which is understandable actually, given everything. Ford emerges from a portal after 30 years and finds out all of this simultaneously. He is not processing it well, but this is also the beginning of the problem that will continue through the rest of the season. Ford and Stan, suddenly together again after all this time, do not have the tools to talk to each other about what happened. The flashbacks that Stan gives in this episode are some of the most affecting things the show ever did. The young Stan and young Ford on the beach with the Stan-O War, the two of them at the science fair. The moment of the accident, shown from Stan's perspective, the panic, the damage, the falling machine, the realization of what he had done. The door of the Pines family home closing. It is not scored for maximum sentimentality. It is quiet. It is matter-of-fact in the way that people tell stories about the worst things that happen to them when they have had long enough to sand the sharp edges down. What the flashbacks also do is something the show does throughout, but never more clearly. They establish that Philbrick Pines bears an enormous share of the responsibility for what happened to this family that nobody ever quite assigns to him out loud. A father who looked at his teenage son after an accident, not an act of malice, and threw him out. A father who did not ask, did not wonder whether the story was as simple as it looked, did not consider that a boy who broke his brother's science project might have done it out of fear and grief and youth rather than deliberate cruelty. A father who made a decision in anger that cost his family 30 years of each other. Stan does not say any of this in the confession. He does not frame the disowning as unjust. He takes the version of events that his family believed, he broke the machine, therefore he deserved to leave, and carries it all the way forward without revision. This is also something real about how guilt works. You can absorb the version of yourself that the people who hurt you believed in, and carry it without question for a very long time. Stan does not cry in this telling, but he does not deflect either. He is, for once, just honest. After the story, the government agents are handled. Ford uses the memory gun on them, erasing their knowledge of the portal. The immediate crisis is diffused, and the brothers come to an arrangement. Ford will stay for the summer to repair the damage the portal caused when it activated. Stan can keep the shack running for the summer. And then, when summer is over, they will figure out what comes next. It is not reconciliation yet. It is not forgiveness. It is two men who love each other enormously and have caused each other enormous harm agreeing very carefully and with a lot of residual anger still in the room to coexist. Section 16. Ford comes home and the brothers must coexist. The second half of Gravity Falls Season 2 is, among other things, a story about two brothers trying to live in the same house after 30 years of absence and 30 years of guilt and 30 years of going their very separate ways. It is not smooth. It was never going to be smooth. Ford immediately becomes a figure of fascination for Dipper, which complicates things enormously. Ford is what Dipper has always wanted, a brilliant scientific mentor who takes him seriously, who engages with his ideas, who sees his intellectual gifts and responds to them. Ford offers Dipper an apprenticeship. He starts teaching him things. The two of them bond over research in a way that Dipper has never quite been able to bond with Stan. And this is both genuinely wonderful for Dipper and an ache for Stan that he does not have words for. Because Stan told Dipper at one point, "Stay away from Ford. My brother is dangerous." This came from a real place. Stan's complicated feelings about Ford, yes, but also genuine concern. Ford has a history with Bill Cipher. Ford makes choices that put people around him in danger. Ford is brilliant and wonderful and also, historically, not great at considering how his actions affect the people who love him. Stan's warning was not without foundation. But Dipper did not listen, and honestly, it is hard to blame him. And Stan watched his great-nephew drift toward the brilliant twin, and he did not push too hard because underneath all of it, Stan knew that Ford was worth knowing. He just also knew it cost things. The tension between Stan and Ford is not constant, and it is not always articulated, but it is there in the background of every scene they share. They grew up speaking the same shorthand, loving the same things, dreaming the same dream, and then 30 years happened and they became people who had very little in common, except that they were the same blood and they had done enormous things to each other, for each other and against each other, that neither of them had fully processed. Stan wants acknowledgement. He wants, not gratitude exactly, though that is part of it, he wants Ford to see him. To see what he did for 30 years and say it out loud, that it was real, that it mattered, that Stan Pines spent 3 decades in a basement alone trying to fix something. He broke by accident, and that counts for something. Ford, for his part, is still working through the shock of everything that happened, and is not always thinking about what Stan needs. He is too focused on the threat that is still active, Bill Cipher, and the equation he carries that Bill will kill to access. The relationship between them is so layered and so real that it is almost difficult to watch. Because most adult relationships with that amount of shared history are exactly this messy. You do not just come back from 30 years of estrangement with a clean slate. You come back with everything you were when you left, plus everything that happened while you were gone. And you have to somehow fit those two people together into something that functions. It is hard work. It is the kind of work that does not have a clear endpoint. And yet, the chess games that nobody asked them to play together, the moment where Ford tries to explain something technical to Stan, and Stan absolutely refuses to admit he does not understand it, and somehow still grasps the essential point. The way they move around each other in the kitchen, with the particular choreography of people who grew up in the same small space. The body memory of being twins, the synchronization that lives below the level of the grudge. They love each other. That is the bedrock. Under all the frustration and the resentment and the hurt and the things that cannot be said simply because they are too large, they love each other. They always did. They always will. The Stano War is still waiting in some form in the distance. The dream is not entirely gone, but first there is a demon to deal with. Section 17. Weirdmageddon and the Hardest Choice. Weirdmageddon arrives in the fall of the summer. Bill Cipher, the dream demon who manipulated Ford into building the portal, who has been plotting his entry into physical reality for a very long time, gets the interdimensional rift that formed as a side effect of the portal's activation, breaks it, and tears a hole in the fabric of reality over Gravity Falls. The sky over the town goes wrong. Physics becomes unreliable. Strange beings pour through from Bill's dimension. The people of Gravity Falls are captured and transformed into statues, frozen in fear and horror by Bill's minions, made into trophies. Bill is free. The apocalypse he has been engineering for decades has finally started. Let us pause here and think about what this means for Stan specifically, because the show does not always make this explicit, but it is right there if you look. The portal activation, the thing Stan spent 30 years working toward, is what created the rift in the first place. When Stan reactivated the portal, the energy of that activation produced a dimensional instability. Ford contained it, for a while, in a small glass case. But the case eventually cracked, and Bill got to it and used it. Which means that in a deeply uncomfortable sense, Stan's 30-year mission of love and guilt and stubborn mechanical engineering was the chain of events that made Weirdmageddon possible. He brought Ford home. Ford brought a time bomb with him. The bomb went off. Stan knows this. You can see it in the way he carries himself through the Weirdmageddon arc. There is an extra layer of something in his posture, something that reads as guilt he does not have the vocabulary to express. He did not cause Weirdmageddon maliciously. He did not cause it through negligence. He caused it through love, through the 30-year project of trying to fix something he broke, and the cruel irony of that is not lost on him. Stan's response to Weirdmageddon is instructive. He does not immediately try to fight. He does not rush toward the danger. He does something that looks like cowardice but is actually, in retrospect, exactly right. He gathers the people who survived and brings them into the Mystery Shack. The shack, it turns out, is protected from Bill's powers. Something about the way the building was constructed, or the portal equipment in the basement, or possibly just some quality of the place that 30 years of weird ambient energy has conferred. Bill cannot penetrate the Mystery Shack's walls. So Stan becomes a general of sorts, commanding the survivors, keeping people together, making plans. He is not the strategic genius in this room. That is Ford and Dipper, and eventually a coalition of people who have been studying Bill for various reasons. Stan's contribution is something different. He is the one who holds the center. He is the one who, when people are scared and fragmented and starting to give up, says no. This is the house, this is where we are not done. There is a specific detail in this section that deserves attention. Stan's plan, while the heroes are trying to figure out how to fight back, is to wait until supplies run out and then eat the gnomes. This is played for comedy, and it absolutely works as comedy. But it is also, in its own weird way, characteristic of Stan, pragmatic to the point of absurdity, already thinking 3 steps ahead about resource management, even in an apocalypse, doing the unglamorous logistical work that the dramatic heroes cannot be bothered with. Someone has to think about the gnomes. Stan thinks about the gnomes. He also, during this period, tries very hard to talk Dipper and the others out of the rescue mission for Ford. His reasoning is not wrong. The mission shack is the only safe space, the chance of success is low, the risks are enormous. But his motivation is more complex than pure tactical calculation. He is still bitter about Ford. Still bitter about the whole summer and the way Dipper gravitated toward Ford and the way nobody ever quite thanked Stan for the 30 years. He does not want to lead a mission to save his brother because part of him, the small, tired human part, is still processing whether he has been sufficiently acknowledged. This is not his best quality. He knows it. But it is real, and the show does not flinch from it. Dipper and Mabel eventually mount a mission to rescue Ford from Bill's pyramid, the Pyramid, and they succeed. They use the Mystery Shack itself, transformed by McGucket into a giant mechanical robot, to fight their way in. They rescue Ford. They rescue the petrified citizens of Gravity Falls. And Ford, thinking quickly, spray paints a zodiac circle on the ground, the Bill Cipher zodiac. The ancient symbol that Ford's research had suggested was the key to defeating Bill if 10 specific individuals stood together in it. They try. They almost do it. 10 people, holding hands, standing in the circle. Dipper and Mabel and Stan and Ford and Suze and Wendy and McGucket and Gideon and Robbie and Pacifica. All the symbols represented. The power gathering. And then Stan and Ford break it. They break it the same way they have been breaking things their whole lives. Not out of malice, not out of stupidity, but because they are 2 people with 30 years of unfinished business standing next to each other in a crisis situation. And Ford says something dismissive, and Stan rises to it, and suddenly they are fighting over grammar in the middle of the apocalypse. Bill sees the disruption and destroys the circle, turns everyone else into wall decorations, locks Stan and Ford in a cage together. Think about what Bill just did here. In destroying the Zodiac, he actually set up the conditions for his own defeat, because putting Stan and Ford alone in a cage together was the one thing that could finally force the conversation that should have happened 30 years ago. Bill, for all his power and ancient cunning, did not understand the Pines brothers. He understood Ford, had studied him for years, had learned his intellectual patterns, knew how to manipulate him through his pride and his isolation and his hunger for knowledge. He did not understand Stan. He never did. Stan was the one Pines Bill never took seriously enough to study. And that was the fatal miscalculation. This is the moment. This is where it has to happen. Because now there is no more deflecting, no more putting it off, no more letting the unfinished business stay unfinished, because the day is full and there will be time later. There is no later. The world is ending right now, right there in Bill's pyramid. And the 2 of them are locked in a cell, and the only thing they have to do is talk. And they talk. Really talk, maybe for the first time in 30 years, about what they did to each other, about the science fair and who was really to blame, and whether Ford ever truly believed Stanley had done it on purpose, about what it cost each of them, about what they lost, about the 30 years and what Stan did, and whether Ford understood what that meant. And Ford says it. He says the thing Stan has been waiting to hear for 30 years, that he is sorry, that he knows what Stan sacrificed, that it matters. And in that cell, in the middle of Weirdmageddon with Bill Cipher somewhere outside destroying the world, the thing that needed to be said is finally said. The brothers make their peace, but the problem is still there. Bill still has the equation that he needs from Ford's mind. The equation that will allow him to spread Weirdmageddon beyond the barrier of Gravity Falls and consume the whole world. The only way to destroy Bill is to get him into a mental space where the memory gun can be used on him. Ford has a metal plate in his head that prevents Bill from entering his mind. There is only one other option. Someone else's mind has to be the trap. Stan volunteers. Of course Stan volunteers. He and Ford swap clothes. Stan puts on the yellow coat, Ford's glasses, Ford's mannerisms. He is going to impersonate his brother, going to lure Bill into entering his mind instead of Ford's. If it works, Ford fires the memory gun. The gun erases everything in Stan's head. Bill, trapped in Stan's mind as the memories are erased, is destroyed. Stan saves the world. Stan saves his family. Stan saves his brother a second time. And Stan, if this works, will remember none of it. None of the summer, none of the kids, none of the long journey that brought him here. He says yes anyway. There is a moment just before the plan is executed where Bill offers Stan an out. He tries to bargain. Tries to offer money, fame, riches, infinite power, his own galaxy. Bill has, by this point in the story, a fairly robust understanding of what motivates human beings. And he knows that the Pines family is motivated by money, by pride, by the desire to be recognized and valued. He makes the offer in good faith by his own twisted logic, genuinely believing that the offer is irresistible, that no reasonable person could turn down their own galaxy. Stan turns it down. He does not even really consider it. He just looks at Bill and says, with the specificity of a man who knows exactly what he has and what it is worth and what he would lose, no. Because the galaxy is not the point. The family is the point. The summer is the point. Mabel's scrapbook is the point. The fishing hats with the names on them are the point. The 30 years in the basement, alone doing the work. That is the point. You cannot buy that. You cannot replace it with infinite power. It is not that kind of thing. Stan volunteers. He puts on the yellow coat. The plan is in motion. Section 18. The mind of Stanley Pines. Bill Cipher makes one mistake, and it is the mistake that costs him everything. He is so giddy, so triumphant, so certain that Ford would never resort to something as base as a con, that when he enters what he believes is Ford's mind, a clean, orderly void, exactly what you'd expect from the precise scientific mind of Stanford Pines, and opens the door at the end of it, he finds something completely different. He finds Stan's living room. Stan is sitting in his chair, paddleball in hand, looking at Bill with a grin that contains about 3 decades worth of accumulated satisfaction. He does the finger gun thing. He winks. He looks at the most powerful dream demon in existence and says something very close to surprise. Bill panics. He offers everything. Money, fame, riches, infinite power, Stan's own galaxy. All of it, please. Anything Stan wants. Just let Bill out of here. Stan looks at him steadily, the way you look at someone when you have nothing left to lose and everything to gain, and he says, "You made one fatal mistake. You messed with my family." The memory gun fires. Stan's mind begins to burn, not violently, not agonizingly, but like a slow blue fire, consuming the rooms of his past. 30 years of mystery tours. 30 years of basement nights. Seuss's laugh. Mabel calling him Pumpkin. Dipper's ridiculous pine tree hat. Ford's yellow coat. The Stano War on the beach at Glass Shard Beach decades ago, 2 kids talking about the world they were going to see together. Bill, trapped in the burning mindscape, weakening as the memories vanish, tries one more time to appeal. He reaches out. He pleads. Stan punches him in the eye. Bill Cipher, the ancient dream demon, the triangular impossibility, The being who had been engineering an apocalypse for longer than most civilizations have existed, shatters, breaks apart like glass. The pieces fall and do not come back. Outside the pyramid collapses. Bill's minions are sucked back into the rift. The sky over Gravity Falls heals. The petrified citizens unfreeze. The world is saved, and Stan's mind is empty. He sits in the grass outside the ruined Mystery Shack. Because the shack is wrecked now, the building that served as the headquarters of the battle against Weirdmageddon, showing all the damage you would expect. And he is awake, and he is breathing, and he is fine in every physical sense. He just has no idea who anyone around him is. Ford is there. Dipper and Mabel are there. Suze is there. They are all looking at this man who just saved the world and who has no memory of having done it, no memory of them, no memory of the summer or the 30 years or any of it. Ford says quietly that Stan is their hero. His voice cracks on it. The kids try, they talk to him, they show him things. They are trying everything they can think of to give him back something, any fragment of what he lost. Nothing works. Ford tells them gently that he is gone. The Stan they knew is gone. The memories were the gun's ammunition, and the gun is empty. And then Mabel's pig, Waddles, licks Stan's hand. And Stan, without thinking, without knowing why, says his name. Waddles. He knows the name of the pig. Section 19. Coming Home. Memory, scrapbooks, and Waddles. This is the part that gets people every time. It should not work as dramatically as it does. A pig licking an old man's hand and the old man knowing the pig's name? It is, on the surface, a small thing. But it is the right small thing, landed at exactly the right moment. And what it means is everything. It means that the memories are not gone. Or not all of them. Or at least not yet, or not entirely. They are somewhere in the rubble of whatever the gun left behind, and the right key might find them. It is worth thinking about why Waddles, of all things, is the key. Not a person. Not a place. A pig named Waddles, whose name Stan apparently knows without knowing that he knows it. The show makes a point earlier that the recovery of memories erased by the memory gun is possible. The Society of the Blind Eye episode establishes that erased memories can come back under the right conditions, which is one of those pieces of setup that pays off here in a way that does not feel cheap because it was earned. But why Waddles? There is something about animals and the way we love them that bypasses whatever defenses the human heart puts up. Waddles was not complicated. Waddles was not a source of guilt or obligation or unfinished business. Waddles was just a pig, and Stan loved him in the completely uncomplicated way you can love a thing that asks nothing of you except your company. That love was apparently the part that survived the deepest, reached the furthest, held on the longest. The uncomplicated love was the last thing standing. And Mabel's scrapbook. The scrapbook that Mabel has been building all summer. Every page a small act of documentary love. Every photo and drawing and folded in paper a way of saying this happened and it mattered. That is the key to the rest. Because what it does is not just trigger memories. It is the evidence of a summer that was real. Of a family that existed. Of 30 years of solitary work that, it turned out, produced something that could be documented, remembered, held in your hands. Mabel runs for her scrapbook. Her summer memories scrapbook. She has been making it all summer, filling it with photos and drawings and little mementos of everything they did together. Every adventure, every weird moment, every afternoon and evening in the Mystery Shack. It is Mabel being Mabel, which is to say, it is Mabel being the person who documents love because she believes love is worth documenting. She shows it to Stan. Page by page. Here is the fishing trip. Here are the fishing hats you made for us. Here is the bottomless pit. Here is the time we went to jail together for the counterfeit money, which was your fault, but also we all went. So it was kind of a family thing. And Stan sits in his chair that he somehow still gravitates toward. The chair that is still his chair, even though he does not know why, and he looks at the pages. And slowly, like someone coming back from a very long distance, the memories return. Not all at once, not completely. Gradually, over the following days and weeks, Ford later tells Dipper in the show's epilogue material that he spent every available moment helping Stan recover, finding old videos of them as children, recounting stories, patiently and tearfully apologizing for everything he should have apologized for years ago. The process was as much about love and intention as anything else. The memories that the gun erased were not entirely gone. They had somewhere to come back to. A self that remembered, even if the specific episodes were fuzzy, that it had lived and loved and mattered. Waddles knew. Stan knew the pig's name, and Mabel knew what that meant, and she was right. That is the thing about Mabel Pines and her absolute faith in people. She is right more often than she should be, and the times she is right matter more than almost anything else in the show. She trusted Stan in the portal room, and she was right. She trusted Stan in the scrapbook, and she was right. The town cleans up over the following week. There is a law passed called the Never Mind All That Act because Gravity Falls is the kind of town that responds to interdimensional apocalyptic events by formally legislating civic amnesia. The Northwest family goes bankrupt. There is a lovely, petty satisfaction in this. The general rhythms of life reassert themselves, and on the last day of summer, Dipper and Mabel have to go home. Section 20. The Stan-O War. 2 and the dream finally fulfilled. The ending that Gravity Falls gives Stanley Pines is, if you follow his whole story from the beginning, exactly the right one. Not the easy one. Not the triumphant one where everything is healed and everyone is happy and the wound of 30 years just closes cleanly. It is the right one, which is more complicated and more true. Stan hands the Mystery Shack over to Seuss. Seuss Ramirez, who has worked there since he was 12, who has cleaned the exhibits and fixed the plumbing and gone on every supernatural adventure and stayed loyally at Stan's side through all of it, who never had a father figure in his own life, and found one in this grumpy, brilliant, impossible old man without either of them quite intending it. Stan gives him the shack, gives him the job, gives him the life that the shack represents, because the shack was always going to be someone else's now. Stan has somewhere else to be. Think about what this gesture means in the full context of Stan's story. The Mystery Shack was never supposed to be permanent. It was a cover, a practical invention to keep money coming in while the portal work continued. And then it became more than a cover. It became the center of a life. It became the thing Stan was known for, the thing people in Gravity Falls associated with him, the context in which every relationship that mattered to him formed. The shack held 30 years of his life. It held Seuss growing up and Wendy working summers, and the twins having the strangest and most formative summer of their lives. It held the basement where the real work happened, and the gift shop where the fake work happened, and the living room where Stan watched television in his boxers and occasionally pretended not to care about things he cared about enormously. Giving it to Seuss is not just a business transaction. It is Stan saying, "I trust you with the thing that made me, because I know you will love it right." It is Stan acknowledging, in the most practical and deflected way available to him, that Seuss was his. It is the closest thing to a parental goodbye that a man who is never anyone's parent knows how to give. Seuss puts on the fez in the epilogue, and it fits, because of course it fits. It was always going to fit. Ford is waiting at the dock, the Stan-O War 2. A real ship. Seaworthy, named after the wreck they found on the beach in Glass Shard Beach, when they were children who still believed the world was going to be easy and kind and full of adventure. 2 brothers, finally, setting sail. The moment they push off from the dock is, if you know the whole story, almost too much to hold. Because you know where this started. You know the beach and the rusted hull and the 2 boys making a promise to a horizon they were not yet old enough to reach. You know the science fair. You know the door closing. You know the 30 years in the basement. You know all of it, and then you see this. These 2 old men on a real ship in the actual ocean, finally keeping the promise they made when they were young enough to still mean it without qualification. Some promises take a lifetime to keep. That is not failure. That is just the shape some promises have. The show's epilogue sequence flashes forward, a Seuss running the Mystery Shack successfully with his girlfriend Melody. Kids in Gravity Falls growing up with the strange and beautiful life the town offers. Dipper and Mabel back in Piedmont opening a letter from Wendy that is full of everyone's signatures and says they will see you next summer. And Stan and Ford on the ocean, in the open water somewhere between here and everywhere. The 2 of them finally doing the thing they promised each other they would do on a beach in New Jersey when they were kids. a strange creature of some kind visible in the water in the distance, and Ford pointing at it and Stan already getting to his feet, already in it, already ready for whatever comes next. The Stan of War 2 does not have a set destination. That is kind of the whole point. Two brothers who spent 30 years unable to reach each other are now on a boat with the whole ocean ahead of them, and no particular agenda except to be curious about what is in it, and to be curious about it together. Ford will be taking notes. Stan will be making up better names for the things Ford identifies and charging Ford admission to hear them. They will argue constantly, and it will be the most comfortable arguing either of them has done in decades. That is where Stanley Pines ends up. Not rich, not in Glass Shard Beach, not in the Mystery Shack. On the water with his brother finally keeping the promise they made before everything went wrong. The wrong things led here. The broken machine and the disowning and the 30 years alone and the memory that was taken, Naakaye, and the memory that came back. All of it led here. You could call that a tragedy with a redemptive ending, or you could call it just a life, the kind that gets shaped by the things that happen to you and the things you do in response, and ends up somewhere unexpected and true. Stan Pines would call it Tuesday. Then he would wink and try to sell you something. Then he would go back to the ocean. Section 21. What Stan Pines means. Here's the thing about characters who carry their stories this heavily. They change the way you see the world a little bit if you spend enough time with them. Stan Pines is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is a con man who stole his brother's identity and ran a fraudulent tourist attraction for 3 decades and was banned from 32 states. His criminal record, as alluded to at various points in the show, is genuinely extensive and covers a remarkable range of activities. He is selfish in small ways constantly, and in large ways sometimes. He would argue with you about almost anything. He will absolutely charge you admission for something that is clearly fake. But he spent 30 years doing something that nobody asked him to do and nobody knew he was doing. He spent 30 years trying to fix something he broke, alone in a basement, without any guarantee that it would work or any way of knowing whether Ford was even alive on the other side of the portal. He did it because Ford was his brother, and brothers do not get left in other dimensions if there is any possible way to bring them home. He did it because the guilt was real and the love was realer. He did it because he was Stanley Pines, and Stanley Pines was, underneath all the aliases and all the deflection and all the jokes at other people's expense, the person who stayed. When it counted, when the actual end of the world was happening and someone had to walk into the trap, he walked into the trap. He did it knowingly. He did it for his family. He did it in a way that would, if it worked, cost him everything he had spent 30 years building. And he did it anyway. There is a kind of heroism that gets talked about a lot. The dramatic kind, the visible kind, the kind with a speech and a theme and an audience and someone watching. And there's another kind, quieter, harder in some ways, that happens in the basement when no one is watching, year after year, because the person who needs help is someone you love, and you are the only one in a position to help them. Stan's 30 years are the quieter heroism, the less visible one, the one that the show asks you to see and understand and value. The reason Grunkle Stan works as a character, the reason he is beloved in the way that he is, the reason people who have watched the show multiple times still tear up at the scrapbook scene, is that he is real in a specific way that goes beyond craft. He is real in the way that complicated people are real. He is a collection of damage and love and stubbornness and talent and failure and commitment, and none of those things cancel each other out. He is not good despite being a con man. He is not heroic despite being selfish. He is all of it simultaneously, a whole person, and whole people are hard to find in fiction and harder to let go of when you do. Alex Hirsch based him on his grandfather, also named Stan, a man who told tall tales and messed with the grandkids to get a rise out of them. Hirsch has said in various interviews that his grandfather Stan was legendary in the family for storytelling, for manufacturing entertaining fictions with complete commitment to the bit, for messing with children in exactly the way that makes children feel simultaneously annoyed and loved. You cannot fake that kind of character. You can observe it carefully over years and then try to render it accurately. That is what Hirsch did. The thing about building a character on someone you love is that love is visible in the architecture. You can see it in the details, The fishing hats with the names on them, the way he counts the money before he falls asleep, the way he calls Mabel Pumpkin. These are the details of someone who was watched with affection, observed by someone who knew him and wanted to preserve what was specific and irreplaceable about him. There is also something worth saying about the specific kind of love that Stan represents, the love that does not speak itself, that does not come with the vocabulary most people learn to expect. Stan is not a man who says, "I love you." He is a man who makes fishing hats and goes to the hospital when the new babies arrive and cannot let go. He is a man who spends 30 years in a basement for someone who is not there to appreciate it. He is a man who, when asked to sacrifice the only summer that gave him back a sense of family, says yes, because that family is worth more than his memories of it. This is a kind of love story that does not always get recognized as one. The story of the quiet one. The one who was always there even when nobody was watching. The one who did the work in the dark. We live in a culture that rewards visible declarations, dramatic gestures, the big speech. Stan Pines made no speeches. He just showed up for 30 years. Stanley Pines is permanent in the way that characters who are really seen become permanent. He will be in people's heads long after the credits roll, and not just because the story is clever, or the animation is good, or the jokes land. He will be there because he is the proof of something most stories do not bother to prove. That the person who matters most is not always the one who looks like they matter. That love wearing a bad disguise is still love. That 30 years in a basement, alone, doing hard work for someone who is not there to appreciate it, is one of the most heroic things a person can do. That the con man was always playing for keeps. There is one more thing, and it connects to the very start of what makes this character special. The show's hidden cipher in the first episode, Stan is not what he seems, was not a warning. It was a promise. The show was promising you, from the very first moment, that the person who looks like the least important person in the room is actually the most important. That the grumpy old con man with the fez is the heart of the whole story. That if you pay attention, if you look under the surface, if you do the work of really seeing someone, you will find something worth knowing there. That is the lesson of Grunkle Stan. That is what the show hid in a Caesar cipher in the opening credits of its very first episode, for anyone patient enough and curious enough to find it. Not what he seems. Never was. Section 22. The Long Goodbye. There is something I want to return to before we close this out. And it is the scrapbook scene, because I think it is the most important moment in the show, and it does not always get treated that way. Mabel Pines has been making this scrapbook all summer. Every page is a memory, a photo, a drawing, a little piece of paper that says something happened here, we were here, this was real. Mabel is 12 years old, and she is already practicing the thing that humans do when they understand, on some level, that time passes and takes things with it. She is documenting. She is preserving. She is saying, through the act of putting things in a book, that these experiences mattered and that she wants to be able to come back to them. When she shows the scrapbook to Stan, to this man who has no idea who she is, who is sitting in a chair he does not remember owning in a building he does not recognize, she is making an argument. She is arguing that he is still in there, that the person who taught her to fish badly and went to jail with her and looked at her when he thought she was not watching and called her pumpkin, that person is not gone. The memories got taken, but the person is still there. The roots are still there, the love is still there. And she is right. Waddles proves it first. The pig that Stan does not remember adopting, but whose name is apparently carved into whatever remains after everything else is gone. Waddles licks his hand, and Stan says the name without thinking, without choosing to. The way you say the names of the people and things that live so deep in you that they survive even catastrophe. This is what Stan spent 30 years working toward. Not just getting Ford back, not just saving the world, but arriving at this chair. This chair in this ruined house in this weird Oregon town, with a pig and a scrapbook and 2 kids who kept making fishing hats with his name on them in their heads long after he forgot he had a name. He earned this. Every night in the basement, every bad sale, every state ban, every alias, every year of solitary work in the dark. He earned the pig, licking his hand and the memory coming back, and the scrapbook on his lap and the summer coming home. The dream came back, not all at once, gradually, in pieces, the way the best things come back. But it came. And then there was the ocean. There is a line from the show's final episode that always stays with me, from the Cipher decoded from the credits. The tale's told, the summer's done. In memories, the pines still play on a sunny summer's day. It was hidden in a code, which is appropriate. Everything Stan loved was hidden. The mission, the guilt, the tenderness, the summer. All of it encoded in layers that you had to look for to find. The thing about an ending like the one Gravity Falls gives Stan is that it does not feel like a fantasy. It does not feel like wish fulfillment in the cheap sense. It feels earned. In the most specific, detailed, careful sense of that word. The show worked for that ending. Every episode, every late-night basement scene, every fishing hat, every moment where Stan's face went briefly, unguardedly soft when he thought nobody was watching. All of that accumulated weight comes to bear on the scrapbook scene and on the ocean scene, and on the image of two brothers finally going where they always said they would. Stan Pines did not get the life he planned. He was supposed to be on the Stan War decades ago. He was supposed to never see Glass Shard Beach again in his rear view. He was supposed to have Ford with him and the horizon ahead of them, and nothing but adventure for as long as they could sustain it. That version of the story got interrupted at a science fair, and then in a basement, and then for 30 years in an Oregon forest. But here's the thing about stories. They do not always end when they are supposed to. Sometimes they just change shape. Sometimes the dream you had at 17 comes back to you at 60, wearing different clothes, on a different ship, with 30 years of damage and grace between you and the person you are sailing with. Sometimes the ending is not the one you planned. It is just the right one. The Stan War 2 is out there on the ocean. Stan and Ford are arguing about something, probably. Stan is making some kind of comment that Ford finds insufferable. Ford is correct about something in a way that Stan is never going to admit. There is something strange in the water ahead of them, and they are both already moving toward it. That is the Pines way. That has always been the Pines way. Move toward the strange thing. See what it is. Together. You found it. You spent this time with it. Stan Pines would probably tell you to pay for the tour next time. He would charge you $6 for the audio guide, and it would be waterlogged, and the audio would cut out in the middle of the important parts. He would make a joke that lands slightly off-center and then pretend he was not happy when it made you laugh. But if you were going through something hard and you needed someone in the basement with you, doing the work nobody asked them to do, staying when it would have been easier to leave, he would be there. He would have been there the whole time. He always was.